There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels full, full of memories, full of questions, full of everything you once gave and never received back. It's the silence that happens when you stop calling, when you stop texting, when you stop waiting for someone who no longer shows up. And even if your phone stays quiet, your mind doesn't. Because you keep wondering, does he even notice? Does he care? Or worse, was I the only one who ever cared at all? Louise Hay once said, "What I give out comes back to me." And that includes what is no longer said, what is no longer offered, what is no longer begged for. Because there comes a moment in every woman's life when the pain of staying starts to hurt more than the fear of letting go. And so, you go quiet, not because you want to punish, not because you want to play games, but because your soul is exhausted from explaining its own worth to someone who never really listened. This isn't about pride. It's not about ego. It's about something much deeper, something sacred. The kind of silence that happens when a woman finally remembers, I am not here to prove I'm worthy of love. I am here to live as someone who already is. Clarissa Pinkola Estes speaks of the wild woman, the one who knows when to walk away, not in anger, but in dignity. She doesn't chase. She doesn't bargain with her own value. She doesn't wait at the doorstep of someone's indifference hoping to be chosen. No, she retreats. She gathers her energy back to herself. She becomes invisible, to become invincible. But let's be honest, this isn't easy, because part of you still hopes, still waits for that message, that call, that moment when he realizes what he lost. And yet, there's a deeper truth whispering beneath the noise of your mind. A truth your soul has always known, but maybe you were too afraid to accept. Ignoring, when done the right way, isn't a weapon. It's not about hurting him. It's not about revenge. It's a form of energetic self-respect. It's a boundary that doesn't need to be spoken, because it's felt. It's the invisible shift that happens when you stop leaking your energy into someone who never deserved to hold it. And it's in that silence, that sacred, magnetic, untouchable silence, that everything begins to change. Not because he suddenly became a better man, not because he finally grew up, but because when a woman stops feeding a dynamic that drains her, the energy shifts, the dance breaks, the mirror cracks. You're not here to beg. You're not here to wait. You're not here to prove. You're here to remember. To remember that the love you were trying so hard to get from him was always meant to come from you, from the deepest part of you, the part that never left you, the part that never rejected you, the part that was never absent. And maybe, just maybe, this is the moment when you realize that ignoring him isn't really about him. It's about choosing you, finally, fully, completely. Let's talk about what that really means. But what does it really mean to ignore someone without turning it into punishment? There's a fine line between withdrawing to protect your energy and pretending to be distant while secretly aching inside. And that line is self-worth. Because when you ignore from a place of wounded pride or suppressed anger, it doesn't liberate you. It actually keeps you tied to him energetically, even if your lips stay closed and your phone stays silent. Louise Hay used to remind us that your value is defined by you, not by anyone else. And this is where everything begins to shift. Ignoring is not about proving that you're strong enough to walk away. It's about deciding that your energy, your time, your emotional presence are sacred currencies, and they will not be spent on anyone who does not cherish them. It's not about being cold. It's not about being cruel. It's the gentle but firm decision that says, I will not continue to water a garden that refuses to grow. Because every text you sent that went unanswered, every moment you sat there wondering why you weren't enough, was a form of emotional labor that drained you, labor that was never reciprocated. And here's the truth nobody tells you. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop showing up where you are not valued, not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity, with grace, with quiet power. The moment you choose to withdraw your energy, something powerful begins to happen. You stop participating in a dynamic that kept you small. You stop feeding a loop where your worth was dependent on his attention, his validation, his crumbs of affection. And in that silence, something shifts, not just for him, but for you. Because suddenly, you're no longer the woman who waits. You become the woman who chooses, who selects, who decides where her light shines and where it no longer does. You're not punishing him. You're not playing games. You're simply saying, without words, without drama, I deserve more than this. And if you cannot rise to meet me, I will not lower myself to meet you. And that's not rejection. That's self-respect in motion. But there's another layer to this. A truth that lives beneath the surface of words, beneath the logic of the mind. Because silence isn't really silent, is it? It speaks. It echoes. It fills the space between you and him with a presence so loud, it becomes impossible to ignore. Have you ever noticed how the absence of a sound can be heavier than the sound itself? How the quiet after someone stops texting, stops calling, feels louder than any argument ever could? That's because silence, real silence, creates a mirror. And in that mirror, he's no longer looking at you. He's forced to look at himself. And this is the moment when his mind starts spiraling. He starts wondering, why is she so quiet? Is she over me? Is she done? Did she meet someone else? Why isn't she chasing me like before? That empty space where your energy used to live becomes unbearable, because suddenly, your absence becomes presence. It's in that space that men start to realize that what they once took for granted was actually nourishment. It was comfort. It was validation. And now, it's gone. The masculine mind is not wired to process emotional loss the same way the feminine does. When you withdraw, he doesn't just miss you. His nervous system feels the lack of the emotional dopamine you once provided, the soft reassurance, the constant availability, the safety of knowing you were always there. But now, you're not. And that silence, that sacred withdrawal, becomes louder than 1,000 words. It's not you yelling. It's not you explaining. It's not you pleading. It's the undeniable weight of your absence vibrating through his psyche. And what happens in that void is that he's forced to confront something he was never ready to face. That you were never his possession. You were never guaranteed. You were never obligated to stay. And the realization of that truth echoes louder than anything you could ever say. And yet, not every kind of silence holds the same power. Because here's where many women unknowingly fall into a trap. The trap of reactive silence. The kind of silence that isn't born from peace, but from pain, from anger, from disappointment. It's a silence that still screams, even if no words are spoken. And maybe you've felt it before. That ache in your chest when you try to pull away, but your heart is still tangled in what you're trying to leave behind. You stop texting, but you check your phone every 5 minutes. You don't answer, but you're secretly hoping he'll notice, that he'll chase, that he'll care. But energy doesn't lie. Silence that comes from bitterness doesn't create attraction. It creates resistance, because it's still energetically hooked into him. It's not a clean break. It's not self-love. It's emotional warfare with yourself. There's a difference between silence that is punishment and silence that is power. One says, I'll hurt you the way you hurt me. The other says, I choose myself now. I return home to me. And the truth is, men can feel the difference. A man knows when you've truly let go, when your silence is the sound of a woman reconnecting with her own worth. And he also knows when your silence is just another desperate attempt to get his attention, even if you don't say it out loud. That's why ignoring can only work when it's not about him at all, when it's about you, when it's about no longer being willing to abandon yourself, just to be seen by someone who never truly looked. The energy of a woman who removes herself with love, with dignity, with self-respect, is unmistakable. It's magnetic. It's disarming. It's the kind of energy that doesn't chase, doesn't convince, doesn't beg. It simply exists in her own fullness. And when that happens, something extraordinary begins to shift. Because the moment you stop needing him to see you is the moment he starts to wonder why your light no longer shines in his direction. There's something few women understand, something hidden beneath the surface of every relationship dynamic. It's the invisible game of emotional supply, the unspoken exchange of attention, validation, presence, and how the masculine mind reacts when that supply is suddenly cut off. When you were texting, checking in, making yourself available, even in the smallest ways, you were offering him emotional dopamine. You were the source of comfort, of reassurance, of knowing that someone out there was thinking about him. You became, without realizing it, part of his emotional ecosystem. And just like the brain reacts to sugar, to caffeine, to addiction, the male psyche becomes accustomed to the steady stream of feminine energy, your words, your presence, your effort. Even if he didn't consciously appreciate it, his nervous system noticed every single drop. But here's where it shifts. The moment you withdraw, the moment you stop feeding that loop, the moment your energy goes quiet. His brain doesn't just miss you emotionally. It goes into a mild state of withdrawal. The access he once had, the easy supply of your attention, is now gone. And without that dopamine hit, frustration starts to rise, restlessness, curiosity. His mind begins to search for ways to get back what was lost, to reopen the portal of comfort that your presence once provided. But it's not just about comfort. It's about control. Because whether consciously or unconsciously, he had grown used to the idea that you were always there, that no matter how distant he became, you would still show up, still text, still care. And now, for the first time, he's faced with a reality he never prepared for. A reality where you are no longer feeding the connection. A reality where your absence feels heavier than he ever imagined. It's in this invisible game, this psychological dance, that men begin to shift. Not because you tried to make them, not because you forced them, but because nature itself abhors a vacuum. And when the supply is cut, the search begins. But here's where the misunderstanding often happens. Ignoring doesn't mean disappearing completely. It's not about deleting yourself from existence. It's about something far more subtle and far more powerful. It's about becoming energetically selective. Because being silent doesn't mean you never answer. It doesn't mean you ghost him or pretend you don't care. It means you stop initiating. You stop being the one who holds the thread of the connection. You stop feeding the cycle where you were the only one making sure the bond stayed alive. It's the shift from, how do I keep this connection alive? To, let's see if he's even capable of meeting me halfway. And when you step back into that space, something profound happens. You begin to reclaim your time, your mental space, your emotional bandwidth. No longer are you waiting by the phone. No longer are you rereading old conversations, wondering what went wrong. No longer are you the caretaker of a relationship that was never fully mutual. And here's the beauty of it. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to send a dramatic message saying, I'm done. You don't have to threaten or announce your departure. Your absence, your withdrawal, your quiet shift speaks volumes. Because when a woman who used to overgive stops giving, the silence is deafening, and that's when the real test begins. Not for him, but for you. Because this is the moment you learn that ignoring, when done from a place of love for yourself, isn't about punishing anyone. It's about finally refusing to be the one who carries a connection on her own shoulders. And whether or not he notices, whether or not he comes running back, becomes irrelevant. Because by then, you've already remembered that you were never meant to be the one holding both ends of the string. But what truly happens inside a man when you finally step back? When the voice he once took for granted goes silent? When the warmth of your constant presence turns into absence? The male mind isn't wired to process emotional loss the way women do. It's not immediate. It doesn't hit him the moment you walk away. At first, he might even feel relief, freedom, space. But that illusion fades quickly. Because what was once background noise, your presence, your attention, your softness, suddenly becomes a noticeable void. His brain begins to search, subconsciously at first, wondering why the dopamine hit isn't coming anymore, wondering why something feels off. Restlessness creeps in. He checks his phone, but there's nothing. He looks for a sign, but the sign doesn't come. The comfort of knowing you were always there starts to feel like a memory he didn't realize mattered, and the absence of your energy becomes a constant hum in the back of his mind. The longer the silence, the louder it becomes. The curiosity turns into confusion. Confusion turns into frustration. Frustration turns into longing. He starts remembering things he once ignored. The sound of your laughter, the way you cared, the tiny ways you showed up for him, without asking for anything in return. And now, all of it feels distant, fading, gone. The masculine brain isn't quick to admit emotional loss, but it feels it in the body. in the nervous system, in the discomfort that bubbles under the surface, and he starts to realize that what he thought was guaranteed was never truly his to own. And in that realization, a different kind of chase begins. Not the chase for you, but the chase for relief from the void your absence has created. The woman who once filled his world has become the woman whose silence fills every corner of his thoughts. But while his mind starts circling, something even more powerful is happening within you. Because the very moment you stop leaking your energy outward, you start reclaiming it inward, and what once felt like an unbearable emptiness slowly transforms into a quiet sense of presence, a presence with yourself. At first, it feels strange, unfamiliar, like standing in front of a mirror you haven't looked into for years, because for so long, your worth was measured by how someone else responded to you, whether he replied, whether he cared, whether he saw you. And now, in the absence of his gaze, something softer begins to awaken. Your own, Louise Hay would whisper, I approve of myself. And maybe at first, those words feel hollow, foreign, but with each passing day, each hour that you stay true to yourself, they begin to land. They begin to root, because what you're really doing is turning your own love inward. You start noticing the little things, how much more peaceful your nervous system feels without waiting, without wondering, without handing over the keys of your happiness to someone else's inconsistent hands. And slowly, something shifts. You start feeling full, not because he's come back, not because anyone has filled the space he left, but because for the first time in a long time, you are filling it with your presence, with your energy, with your own love. This is the most magnetic version of a woman, the one who no longer looks outside to be chosen, because she has chosen herself. And nothing shines brighter than a woman who remembers her own worth. It's in this space that ignoring isn't even about ignoring anymore. It's not a tactic, not a strategy. It's simply the natural result of no longer being available for anything less than love, real love, reciprocal love, whole love. And here's where the shift becomes undeniable. Because when a woman steps fully into this space of self-respect, of quiet power, the external world can't help but respond. And yes, he feels it. He senses it. He notices it in ways he cannot even fully articulate. It starts small, a sudden text, a random check-in, something like, hey, just thinking about you. But it's not really about checking in. It's about checking if the door is still open, if the window to your energy is still unlocked. But here's the beauty of it. Now, you are different. You no longer respond from lack. You no longer rush to prove your availability. You no longer fill the silence just because it's uncomfortable. And this is the moment where your power deepens even more. Because instead of reacting, you pause. You feel into your own energy. You ask yourself, do I even want to respond? Is this aligned with the woman I am becoming? Or is this just an old pattern knocking on my door? Because the truth is, when a man senses that you are no longer easily accessible, it awakens a primal response in him. He starts testing the waters, seeing if the gravitational pull he once felt still exists. But now, it's on your terms. You decide when and if you engage. Your energy is no longer something that anyone has automatic access to. It is sacred. It is sovereign. It is yours. And he feels it, not just in whether you answer, but in how you answer, in the slowness of your reply, in the softness of your boundaries, in the way your presence is no longer wrapped in the desperation to be chosen, but in the certainty that you are the chooser. This is what ignoring the right way truly means. Not disappearing, not punishing, but elevating yourself to a level where your peace, your presence, your love are no longer currencies anyone can casually trade for breadcrumbs. And as this new version of you anchors deeper, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The more you withdraw your energy from chasing, from proving, from convincing, the more your inner landscape transforms. What once felt like emptiness now feels like space, sacred space, space to breathe, space to heal, space to reconnect with the woman you were before you ever believed you had to beg for love. Louise Hay would say, "The more I love myself, the less I tolerate anything that isn't love." And those words, they aren't just affirmations. They're activations. They awaken a truth inside of you that had been waiting, quietly, patiently, beneath the layers of doubt, fear, and longing. Because what's really happening is that ignoring him becomes less about him, and more about remembering that you were never meant to abandon yourself in the first place. You start noticing how your nervous system calms, how your mind stops spiraling, how the ache in your chest begins to soften, and when you pass by the places where you used to sit, waiting for his message, you feel it, the shift, the liberation, the knowing that you don't need to be anyone's second thought, because you are your own first choice. And slowly, your energy stops leaking into the past. It stops feeding the story of, why wasn't I enough? And starts nourishing the truth of, I am enough, I always was, I always will be. And what happens on his side is equally undeniable, because the woman who once anxiously waited no longer waits. The woman who once overextended no longer bends. The woman who once hoped to be chosen has chosen herself. And when that happens, it's not just about whether or not he notices, it's about whether or not he's even capable of rising to meet the version of you who no longer accepts crumbs, because she's remembered she was always the feast. And as the energy shifts, the signs begin to reveal themselves. Subtle at first. A sudden text, a random story reply, a comment that seems innocent, but carries weight. The kind of message that reads, "Hey, I was just thinking about you." But the truth behind it whispers something entirely different. Why aren't you thinking about me anymore? He might start showing up in small ways, checking if the door is still cracked open, testing whether your presence, your light, your energy are still something he can lean on whenever convenience allows. But here's where everything is different now. Because the woman you've become, the woman sitting in her power, no longer operates from the same frequency. You don't jump. You don't react. You don't abandon yourself just to maintain a connection that was never balanced. Instead, you breathe. You pause. You ask yourself, does this align with who I am now? Does this serve the love I have for myself? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. But what matters is that the answer comes from you, not from fear, not from scarcity, not from the old need to be seen. Because when you begin to live from this space, something undeniable happens. Your energy becomes a sanctuary, a place where only those who truly respect, truly honor, truly cherish, are allowed in. And what happens on his end? The confusion grows, the curiosity deepens, the absence of your old patterns becomes impossible to ignore. Where there was once a predictable source of validation, there is now a void, a silence that doesn't beg, doesn't explain, doesn't chase. And in that space, he starts to feel it. The pull, the ache, the awareness that the woman who was once so available is now the woman whose presence must be earned. And that changes everything. And as this quiet power anchors even deeper, you begin to realize something sacred. Ignoring was never truly about making him feel your absence. It was always about making yourself feel your own presence. It was about ending the exhausting habit of outsourcing your worth and remembering that the love you were so desperately seeking was always meant to come from within. Louise Hay would remind you, the more I love myself, the less I tolerate anything that isn't love. And that becomes more than just words. It becomes a standard, a vibration, a truth you carry in the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you hold yourself. And Clarissa Pinkola Estes would softly echo that the woman who returns to herself becomes untouchable in the most beautiful way, not because she builds walls, but because she no longer lowers her frequency for anyone who cannot meet her where love actually lives. Ignoring, at its core, is not about silence. It's not about absence. It's about energetic recalibration, about remembering that you were never here to be an accessory to someone's life, but the sacred center of your own. Because when you stop chasing, when you stop proving, when you stop handing over your power in tiny pieces just to be chosen, you become magnetic in a way that words cannot describe. He feels it, whether he admits it or not, whether he responds or not, whether he returns or not. He feels it, the shift, the glow, the unspoken knowing that the woman he once assumed would always be there has become the woman who no longer waits, the woman who no longer negotiates with her own value. And whether or not he ever rises to meet you, no longer defines you, because the woman you've become doesn't need to be rescued, doesn't need to be chosen. She has already done the choosing, and she chose herself. And as this truth sinks in, a new kind of peace begins to rise, a peace that isn't dependent on whether or not he calls, whether or not he comes back, whether or not he finally realizes what he lost. Because the truth is, the moment you chose yourself, you already won. Louise Hay reminds us again and again, I approve of myself. And when those words stop being something you repeat and start becoming something you embody, the entire universe begins to respond differently to you. Because ignoring, real ignoring, isn't about the absence of communication. It's about the absence of self-abandonment. It's the decision to no longer explain your worth, to no longer negotiate with your own value, to no longer settle for being an option when you were always meant to be a choice. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop being available to what hurts, to what drains, to what keeps you small, you become infinitely more attractive, not just to him, but to life itself, to opportunities, to experiences, to people who meet you in the frequency of respect, reciprocity, and real love, because the woman who stops chasing becomes the woman who magnetizes. The woman who stops proving becomes the woman who embodies. The woman who stops waiting becomes the woman who creates. And that is the highest form of self-love. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not about games. It's about quietly, gracefully, and unapologetically choosing yourself again and again and again. So if you ever find yourself wondering, will he feel my absence? Remember this. Your absence is only part of the story. The real power was always in your presence, in the presence you give to yourself. And as this chapter of your journey comes to a close, there's one truth that echoes louder than anything else. You were never meant to convince anyone of your worth. You were never meant to fight to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved. Because the moment you turn that fight inward, the moment you stop seeking outside what was always meant to live within, everything changes. Louise Hay teaches, the more I love myself, the less I tolerate anything that isn't love. And that becomes your compass, your guiding light, your sacred standard. Clarissa Pinkola Estes reminds you that the woman who returns to herself, who reclaims her own wild, intuitive, radiant nature, becomes irresistible, not because she chases, but because she no longer does. Her energy shifts from needing to choosing, from waiting to embodying, from hoping to knowing. So when you ignore, it's never about absence. It's about presence. It's about becoming so deeply rooted in your own worth that anything or anyone that cannot meet you there simply fades away, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with grace, with peace, with softness. And when that happens, yes, he feels it. He notices. He senses the shift. And whether he comes running back or disappears entirely, no longer holds the power it once did. Because the woman you've become doesn't chase love. She becomes it. And that is the greatest freedom. If this message spoke to something deep inside your soul, this space is for you. Make sure you subscribe, because here, we don't just talk about love, we talk about healing, about awakening, about remembering the woman you were always meant to be. And right now, there's another video waiting for you on the screen, one that will take you even deeper into this journey of self-love, emotional freedom, and feminine power. Go ahead, click it, because your next chapter starts there.